All right. So we're about to go live. Move this over. Um, all right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just give it a moment and let people start to populate. I am going to go over the last about 2 weeks worth of um, events in Ukraine. It's really kind of amazing how much has happened over the last couple of weeks. And you don't realize it until you go back over articles and go back over like what you have written about or discussed on YouTube videos. And so I'm going to start on Saturday the 11th. I'm sorry, yeah, Saturday, March 11th, and I'm going to look at that. And hello, Cheryl, welcome. And so if you have any particular questions, I'll answer any questions that you have to start with. And what I'm going to do is go over the last 2 weeks of events. And I'll try to just kind of rehash things. People will watch this in review, but if you have any questions right now, pop those in. And especially if you have questions over what I'm talking about when I'm talking about those things. Um, so I'm going to start with Saturday the 11th. That's day 382. And the event that day that really popped out was Wagner recruitment centers in 42 different cities. That was one of the articles that was like, okay, so they're really, and you see this like trends when you read this many articles about things, you start to see these trends very clearly. Wagner really needs to replenish its sources because Bakhmut has been very, very bad for Wagner. Then Sunday, March 12th, Russian threatens to leave the grain deal. Of course, they're always threatening. We're going to leave this deal or we're going to leave that deal. They don't know how to like get along without trying to negotiate by being hard cases. Like that's like the only mode that they have. I've known people that only have like normal and nuke, like that's their only settings, and that seems to be how like a boss at work that just you're either a normal person or you're just gonna I demand this, like that kind of thing, and that's kind of how Russia is. So they threatened to leave the grain deal. You also had that very interesting article about how Prigozhin was going to run for the president of Ukraine, which, not being a Ukrainian citizen, I'm not sure how that would happen, but I guess he's assuming that once he would get into office, or once Ukraine would fold, then he could install himself or something along those lines. So that was the other article that day. Ukraine considers changing Russia's name to Muscovy, and that just that was both funny, and if you go back and um, read or listen to Snyder's videos about Ukraine and his lectures, then you have a better sense of why Muscovy is kind of an insult to them, and they're more concerned about the insult than they are what they're actually doing to the territory. Hello from Cambodia, welcome. If you guys have any questions, I'm going back over the last 2 weeks worth of events in Ukraine, and if you have questions, pop them up, and I will stop what I'm doing and answer you first. Okay, so that was Sunday, March 12th, and again, that whole idea of naming Russia Muscovoy was just really disconcerting to the Russians. That was just such a high insult to them. Although they call Ukraine cockroaches and inferior, not human, all these other things all the time. So I don't know why they're worried about that kind of insult. Okay, Monday, March 13th, Tucker Carlson's questionnaire about presidential hopefuls, or two presidential hopefuls went out, and that set off a firestorm. And Tucker, I mean, I still don't understand Tucker. He just, I don't understand how he drank the Russian talking point Kool-Aid. He's not exactly, he doesn't generally strike me as the populist type that fits that profile. Laura Ingraham tends to fit that profile more, but at any rate, that's neither here nor there. The questionnaire goes out, and some answered it really well. Vice President Pence did a great job with that, particularly, and then there are some on the other side that were disappointing. And Ron DeSantis was more disappointing than not, but he got a lot of backlash a few days later, and as you well know if you've been watching me. Um, in that, DeSantis, we talked about it as a territorial dispute, and he also called Ukraine not in America's vital interest. Where Pence was saying what I've been saying, which is it is in our interest. We have to address this. This could blow up and become a bigger thing that could draw everybody in, and we don't want that to happen. And so Pence and Biden are essentially on the same page with that. And that doesn't mean that Pence is moderate by any means. It just means that he's understanding the geopolitical realities of what's going on. Okay, day 382. Let's see. What else was there? There was also some unrest in Moldova. Um, on through 381, day 383. ICC is to open war crimes cases in Russia. And now this wasn't the Putin one yet, but they're announcing that they're opening these war crimes cases against Russia. There's continuing fighting in Bakhmut. I'm not really going to talk about Bakhmut here because not a lot has changed. Like you can look at the map and see a little territory here, a little territory here, some pushback, that kind of thing. But you, if you read RT and stuff, like Bakhmut is about to fall, Bakhmut's about to fall, Bakhmut's about to fall, Bakhmut's about to fall, and it's a continual thing. And Russia on day 383 also says, this is again Tuesday the 14th, says that Russia says it doesn't recognize the Hague, and okay, there's a number of countries that don't. China doesn't, we don't, Russia doesn't, a number of countries don't do that. Um, Lithuania designated Wagner as a terrorist organization, and why more countries around the world have not already done that, I don't know. But good on Lithuania for doing that. Lithuania is one of the first to do the right thing time after time. Let me say it like this: the Baltic states and Poland are generally the first to go do the right thing time after time. A Russian plane caused a U.S. drone to crash over the Black Sea. Now, this was something that was not talked about a lot. I didn't talk about it, and I think that uh, we we're trying to be measured, but we're also projecting weakness by not having a real response to this. Downing that drone was, it was in international waters. That's within the rules, and something larger needed to happen. Again, the Russians tend to only respond to shows of strength. Okay, a couple questions have popped up. Do I think DeSantis is prepared to handle foreign policy? Yes and no. He's as prepared as any other governor because he's a governor. He doesn't deal with foreign policy. Nikki Haley is full-throatedly supporting Ukraine. She both had the governor experience in the state of South Carolina and was the ambassador to the UN, so she's better prepared. But most governors aren't. That's just not their thing. They have to get prepped. I think what we're talking about DeSantis. Well, I'm going to come back to DeSantis in just a moment because he's going to make that U-turn, and then I want to talk about something else there. Ozzy said, "I'm not concerned about the resolve of the Ukrainian people. Nobody should be concerned about the resolve of the Ukrainian people. The only way I see this war ending messily is if the USA elects reps who are not going to continue their support to UA." Yeah, and I think that's what Putin is hoping for, but he really can't control that. And regardless of his amount of propaganda, you really have to do a lot more than you're doing in order to make much more of a dent. There are people like me that are very hardened toward that thing. I talked about this the other day, but I love you viewers because you guys give me great ahas about how you see things. So I'm asking in one of my videos, I said, okay, I don't understand this. Why are Democrats off the charts in support of it? And the answer was that they see this innocent victim, which Ukraine is, as this innocent victim. Historically, Democrats tend to be the dovish party, and Republicans tend to be the hawkish party. But Democrats are off the charts. But they see Ukraine being victimized and empathize with the victim. And it's funny because what we settled on was, oh, that's interesting. I see it. I'm speaking for all conservatives now, and that's not necessarily like monolithic, but I see it in reverse. I see the bully first. I see the bully bullying that victim, and I say, no, that bully needs to be stopped. And so I come to it like we see it a little bit differently, but we both agree that that bully needs to not victimize the victim. Even if you're seeing the victim and then seeing the bully victimizing him, it's just we come to it a little differently, but we're on the same page about it. Okay, Cheesy 1969 said China seems to be one of Russia's only allies left, but the invasion of Ukraine has put a major strain on the relations between the two nations. How is China feeling the backlash of the failed invasion? Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to come to China in just a little bit, and I'll try to address that because I'm going through the last 2 weeks. I'm on Tuesday the 14th, and I'm just kind of giving you an overview of major events. So, the fighting in Bakhmut, Russia says that it does not recognize the Hague. Russian plane causes a U.S. drone to crash. On the 15th, we see Republican senators call DeSantis out, and that was great. I'm glad to see that because conservatives are like, no, you can't go down that path. Now, DeSantis is looking like the leader, the leading candidate that could take on Trump. But again, it's way too early to tell. This time last year, Trump wasn't even in the top five. So, or last cycle, Trump wasn't even in the top five in 2015. So, yeah, a lot can change. So don't worry about that necessarily. But I'm glad to see DeSantis kind of reverse course a bit, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Ukraine also shot down a bomber on the 15th. On the 16th, Poland announced that it will deliver jets to Ukraine. That's the Polish president Duda saying that they haven't done it yet, but they announced that they're going to do it. Just like I said, Poland and the Baltic states are usually the first to do these things. Russia quietly mobilizing more men, registering men, like so they're sending out like you have to register, and if you actually are stupid enough to register, you're probably going to get hauled in pretty soon. There's PR campaigns on television, all kinds of things. According to Medvedev, in that particular article that I was reading, I think it was a Radio Free Europe article. Medvedev is wanting another 400,000 mobilized, but they're doing it quietly. They're not closing the border. I was saying, and maybe they'll do it sometime in the line. But I'm saying like they have to mobilize more men. They're going to have to close the border and just really mobilize if they have any chance. They're not doing that, but if they but what they're doing is quietly mobilizing and just like very like not making any noise about it, but actually doing this instead. And that was the same time where I was talking about how Wagner was recruiting using Pornhub as a place for advertisements, and I mean, it's a pretty bizarre kind of situation that they have there. There was also a blast in Rostov on Don on that day. Um, uh, okay, so I'm going to come back to your question, Cheesy 1969, in just a little bit. Friday, last Friday, the 17th of March, that's St. Patrick's Day. ICC arrest warrants for Putin and Maria Belova. That was a bombshell. Like, that was huge. I mean, in geopolitical terms, this was, it was really, really amazing to see something like that happen. The Kremlin was outraged, as you would expect it to be. And they were saying, like, they were actually kind of keeping like a, well, we're not bothered by that, but when they say they're not bothered, they're bothered. Like it's the way that they react to things is so strangely bizarre. Like you can tell what they're bothered by what they point out about how they're not bothered by it. And I don't know how to describe it any better than that, but that's kind of like you can just tell by the way that they react to things time and time again. Slovakia is also sending jets too. They're announcing that. And so you're starting to see some buildup with the jets. And eventually the rest of NATO countries will come along, or larger NATO countries will come along. Turkey, Erdogan on Friday last week said that he will back Finland's NATO bid. I don't think it's been officially done yet, but they're going to be doing that. Now there's a couple dozen of you in here, and if you have any questions, you can just pop them into the chat. I'm going through a 2-week review of major events in Ukraine over the last few weeks. Okay, Saturday, I'm up until last Saturday. This is day 387, the 18th of March. So Biden welcomes the ICC charge for Putin. Now that puts him in a very strange position because officially the USA is not recognize the sovereignty of the ICC. The USA doesn't recognize anyone else's sovereignty over it except for our own sovereignty. And we're very jealous of our freedoms and our rights and that kind of thing. So the military was kind of pushing back against Putin because they don't want to have a problem down the line where the ICC can haul in somebody. But I mean, I particularly, I don't want Putin in front of the court in Hague. I want him to stand trial in Kiev, in the middle of the destruction that he wrought, and to properly be dealt with there. That's just my predilection. Anyone see Peter Pavel's statement? He's a Czech president and ex-NATO general. He said Ukraine only has one chance for an offensive, and then NATO is out of ammo. Um, I don't, I haven't seen that, but I don't know that that assessment is correct. I do know that it's going to be very difficult to fight the way that they are currently fighting with the level of ammunition that they have, because they're both sides are running down, which means that they're going to have to um, switch to other means to fight. Artillery, particularly, is the issue here, if I'm not mistaken. And artillery is the king of battle. It does more damage, but I mean, if they have to switch to bullets and drones and other things, that they're going to switch to other things. So, but one chance to fight it this way, probably that may be true. But Ukraine, I had this written down the other day. The Russians were, I even wrote it down, you can see this here. The Russians were expending 50,000 shells a day in not just in Bakhmut, but in Ukraine, primarily in Bakhmut, where the Ukrainians were only spending 7,000 drones a day. But the difference was that the Ukrainians were making everyone count. So they were geolocating, figuring out where things were, and then making everyone that they could count. So it bridges a bit of that difference. Okay, so we're up to Sunday. Sorry, I'm sorry. We're still on Saturday. So Putin welcomed that ICC charge, and that's another mass of drone attacks. But even drones, there were only 16 drones that day. You've seen a wave of almost 100 drones in a given day. So when you're down to only a wave of 16, that's not a lot. 11 of those were shot down, 34 other airstrikes, and a missile strike too that day. Now, the big news that day was when Putin visited Crimea. And so he's walking around and seeing the sights, and there was an anniversary of when they took Crimea or whatever back from, or made it official or whatever. And then you know what happened in the evening, and we'll get to that in just a moment. I'm going to answer some questions here. Am I going to join us for the Crimean beach party on Victory Day? That's a long way to travel, but I'm looking forward to that party. Long Dong Silver says, any C, oh, we already went on that. Cheryl said, I heard a rumor China has some leverage as far as Ukraine getting long-range missiles. Have you heard that? Ben Hodges seems to think they are essential for Ukrainian victory. I think long-range missiles are useful and maybe even necessary. I don't know why we don't trust the Ukrainians when the Ukrainians, okay, yesterday, I talked about how 90% of Ukrainians think striking into Russia would be a good idea. But I think the government recognizes that they can't go beyond their limits and risk losing their Western partners. So I think the danger is very, very small of them having long-range missiles and then using them inappropriately. I think they'll use them plenty appropriately if they get them, and I think they should have them. Gordon Brown says, hello, sorry I'm late. Have I commented on Biden's visit to Ottawa and his message to Russia and China? I have not. You could probably actually tell me more than I could tell you about that. But I'm just reviewing the last 2 weeks, and that was not a huge thing in my list of issues. Okay, so on Saturday, March 18th, Putin visits Crimea during the day, and walking around, seeing the sights. Okay, it's still Crimea. It's not like it wasn't that big of a thing. But then he made some waves. Sunday, March 19th, he visits Mariupol, or at least his body double does. But I can't say that his body double does because I can't prove it. So I'm not going to say that that was a body double. I am going to give it the benefit of the doubt that it was Putin, even though I know the chin was this or the ear was that, or what. I still can't prove it with a reputable source. So as far as I'm concerned, it was Putin. But even if it was Putin, it was in the middle of the night, right? Like, why not do it during the day? What are you worried about? It's in the middle of the night. He's surrounded by people coming out to him saying, Oh, we're so glad that you're here. Like, what are they walking around in the middle of the night? Well, they're actually his guard. It's like the Where's Waldo of those people that keep showing up in his other pictures. With Larissa and others, right? It's those people. And there was even a woman yelling, "This is a fake," from a window. So, I mean, it wasn't a good look. He didn't see all the damage all around him. He only saw like one functional building. So it was kind of a train wreck for propaganda's sake. On that same day, though, there was this really interesting story. Vucic, the Serbian president, said the ICC warrant will prolong the war. And that really got me thinking. I think he's right. I think that the ICC warrant, as good as it is for certain purposes, hardened Putin from ending uh, earlier than he otherwise might, because he knows that he's in a world of trouble on the other side. Now, they might not be able to come take him, but there's going to be increasing pressure because of that. So Vucic, for as much as I don't particularly like him, he might have made a good point there. Okay, we're up to Monday, March 20th. Monday, March 20th. There are a couple interesting things. The first one is China is ready to, quote, stand guard over world order, according to Xi. So Xi and Putin meet, and they're actually Putin's not getting what he wants out of China. Somebody asked something about China here earlier, and I skipped it for a moment. So Cheesy said China seems to be one of Russia's only allies left, but the invasions of Ukraine have put a major strain on the relations between the two nations. How is China feeling about the backlash of the failed invasion? Okay, so I have a Chinese student in my class. I said, "How do you get here from China?" He said, "Or why do you come here from China?" He said, "Well, I'm kind of a rebel." His parents are all into communism and the indoctrination and whatever. And so he's in one of my graduate classes, and so we talk about these kind of things, and we're just comparing notes. Um, I had another Chinese. Uh, Chinese American or whatever. I don't remember what his background was. Who was telling me that Taiwan won't go like Ukraine, because Ukraine, I mean, there's really a genocidal kind of thing going on. Taiwan won't go down that particular path because Chinese are considered brothers just because they're Chinese, where Ukrainians are considered, they're called brothers, but they're considered lesser than, or it's not the same. Um, I, and something just didn't sit right. So Zhao and I were talking about it, and he said, "Well, yeah, as long as you obey, they'll consider it, but otherwise they'll wipe them out." I mean, think. And we were talking about the Cultural Revolution and other things. So I don't think that holds any water. Okay, back to the question about how is China feeling about it. China is China is like the mob. They're going to try to profit from whether Russia wins or whether the West wins. And so that means they're not going to support, I don't believe, will support Russia with military arms. I don't think they'll even try to surreptitiously do it. And I know that sounds maybe naive, but I think the Western sanctions, if they do, are just too overwhelming to what China is, and they want to trade. China also wants to have this over with because they want to have the new Silk Road, which goes up through Ukraine to Moscow. Believe it or not, if you go look at the map, they want to get this business back on track. They think more like Trump in that sense than they do like anybody else. They just want to get back to business. And while they are Russia's closest ally, they it was really a tepid response that Putin got from Xi in this last meeting. I mean, I, Putin had to be really disappointed. He was talking about the multipolar world, and China's like sitting there, like Xi's sitting there from China, like we will support you with trade agreements, and it wasn't fully throated like he would have hoped that it was. So Putin didn't get anything like what he wanted. But Putin, I think, is thinking that he can run a pipeline, a gas pipeline into China, and then he doesn't have to worry about trading with the West. He can just trade with China. But when he does that, he's going to box himself into a corner where he will be the supplier to China, and China will become the big brother. And it's almost like if you're British and you're watching this, I'm not trying to be offensive, but it's almost like if the British Prime Minister was thinking, and we're going to recreate the world order, and America, Britain's little brother, will be its subservient, whatever. I don't think that's how it's going to work anymore. It's like we look at England, Great Britain as our big little brother now, right? And it's not like we don't mean anything mean by it, but we're looking at it differently. It's like if England was thinking, well, we're going to be the preeminent whatever, and it's really just not population and GDP and other things. That's not going to happen. Same thing with China. China is going to be the dominant force in all of Asia now. As Russia keeps going down, China just has to stay put, and Russia keeps depleting itself. Okay, um, let's see. So that's what was going on with that particular issue. Um, what we also missed were Russia has banned the use of SWIFT banks for its own banks. Now, they were already cut out of the SWIFT system for most of its banks, but now they've banned it completely because Russia's mentality is like moving toward a completely other system. They really are trying to buck the entire international system and make friends with the BRICS in order to trade so that they don't have I don't think it's going to work like they think it will. And when they do, they're going to be in a system to the degree that they accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. They're going to be worse off than where they were before the war kicked off. That on the 20th, the other big news, and this I didn't see anywhere. I was going to talk about it, but I had other things to talk about. Ben Cohen from Ben and Jerry's donated $1 million to a campaign against U.S. military support. And you don't hear a lot about this kind of thing. It gets scuttled in the news. It was out there. This was actually in the Daily Beast, believe it or not. And so there are voices on the left. The more progressive, the more far left you see that kind of thing. Usually middle left is not in that kind of camp, but the more progressive, that's where you find this kind of thing. And there are fewer voices on the left, admittedly, than there are on the right. There's a larger populist base than there is in a progressive left base that is like that. Okay, so let me go back to the questions again. So Cheryl said, Mariupol is the only major city Russia has taken and home to many of the legendary and much maligned Azov regiment. Mariupol is the only thing Putin has to celebrate. That's correct. He's hoping to celebrate Bakhmut, and I just don't know what's going to happen with Bakhmut. I mean, they've just put up a significant fight there. I mean, they've been at Bakhmut for about 6 months now. Okay. Ozzy said, we are all waiting on the ground launch to 150 km should make a difference. Yes, we're all with you on that. I don't know if any of my many letters to Biden are making a difference. I hope Hodges has an inside line, and I hear oligarchs are still able to get their money through Switzerland and Australia. I believe that's true. Swiss banks are so it depends. Officially, the Swiss have said that they were going to cut off certain banks, but not necessarily all individuals that have been sanctioned. So there's some truth to that, but I'm not exactly sure how much. Okay, so back to where we are. So that was Monday, the 20th. Tuesday, the 21st, Putin meets with Xi. Again, there's just these tepid agreements. Xi invites Putin to China, and they want to work out that gas pipeline. Japanese while Putin was meeting with Xi, the Japanese prime minister was meeting with Zelensky in Ukraine. I thought, man, it's such a bizarre world. Like you think about the World War II, and it's Germany and Japan against the Allies, and now it is Russia invading Ukraine. So NATO and most of Europe, including Germany, is with Ukraine, and Japan is with Ukraine, and China, who was with essentially against Japan and Germany in World War II, with the Allies in a sense, is now kind of aligned with Russia. It's just a strange, convoluted kind of thing to watch, but it's very interesting. Russian missiles also were destroyed in a Ukrainian strike in Crimea. Now, getting longer range will allow them to do even more longer range things, including, and you could almost do a drinking game with this if you were of that. If you were looking forward to something interesting to pair with Ukraine, like when will the Kerch Bridge be hit again? Because it will be hit again. I mean, it's only a given. It's only a matter of time to figure out when the Kerch Bridge will be hit again. Cheryl just popped up. I'm pro-Ukraine progressive because human rights are core value to put to the test, overriding all others. I just want universal health care, a moderate position in Europe. Um, okay, well, all right. I wasn't saying all progressives are in this camp. I am saying that where I see the anti-Ukraine support, it comes from the progressives, not the uh, uh, doctrinaire liberals or the moderate liberals. It comes from the very progressive wing. Cheesy 169 said oil and gas revenue crashes 46% and economy suffers 34 billion deficit in February, according to Joe Blog. Yeah, a third of Russia's revenue comes from oil and gas. So, so they have to do something. They are really hurting, and there's a Yale economist that was talking about this. Like, the banks can just make up whatever numbers we can't verify, and so they actually make things look better than they probably are. Matt says, hey, Matt, where did the spring go? There is a snowstorm here today in Sweden. I don't know, but that I think we're about to get to summer pretty shortly. We're going to get out of the mud in not too long in Ukraine, and then be able to see another offensive commence. Okay, back to our story here. We're on Wednesday. There's more strikes, airstrikes on dormitories. I mean, it's a war crime. I mean, it's not. They tout this like we can target perfectly, and then they hit a dormitory. So either they're lying or they have bad, aim or something. But they're not lying. They're uh, trying to scare the population, and that has never worked. It didn't work in the Blitz in World War II. Only seven. This was an interesting article, and it was covered in RT, but then it's actually verifiable as well. Only 7 of 30 NATO countries are paying their 2%. Now think about that. This is something that Trump was actually right about, maybe for the wrong reasons, but still right about. NATO, you need to pay your bills and step it up and have your military. Like, if had NATO been doing this, we wouldn't be worried about the ammunition shortage at this point. So only 7 of 30 NATO countries are paying their 2%. And then Solenberg, in a different article, said, brace yourself, it's going to be a long war. Okay, the IMF announces $15.6 billion support package last Wednesday as well. That's the first one like that during wartime. So usually they wait till afterwards to help reconstruct, but they've done it. The World Bank has estimated a $411 billion is what will be about the bill for reconstruction of Ukraine. And for my money, that ought to come out of Russian gas and oil. I don't think it's fair or right or even moral to ask the West that has been supporting Ukraine to do a Marshall Plan for Ukraine. Now, this needs to come from the aggressor, not from the allies that have been trying to help it. Zelensky visits near Bakhmut, which was really impressive. He didn't have to do that. He wasn't in Bakhmut. He was just behind it, but still pretty close to the front line, a lot closer than what Putin was at any time. And Slovakia will get 12 helicopters in exchange for the 4 jets that they're sending to Ukraine. And so, again, Ukraine's starting to get those jets, and that was supposed to be a red line, just like tanks were supposed to be a red line, just like other things were supposed to be a red line. And we keep crossing and crossing and crossing because the Russians were deterring. They're not actually going to use nuclear weapons. I mean, there's nothing that comes good that comes out of them doing that. Let me go back to the comments. Iran showed Russia how to sell oil on the gray market. Perhaps they have. I know that India was getting their oil, converting it to diesel, and then sending it back, and they're trying to close that loophole. Plus, Russia bought all the world's old tanker ships, and their oil sales are not trackable by Western sources now. Well, okay, I mean, perhaps that's the case. Part of the problem was they couldn't insure their tankers going somewhere, and that was part of what was precluding it. But still, they are crippled. Sanctions don't work by themselves, but they can help hobble the nation. So I mean, that's where we are. Okay, let's go to Thursday, the 23rd of March. Russia makes threats to the ICC, saying we're going to, essentially that they were going to bomb them or shoot missiles at them. That would be a very bad policy. But of course, that's Medvedev running his mouth, and you can't believe a word he says. Bulgaria refuses to send aid in the form of jets or tanks to Ukraine because they have a pro-Kremlin-leaning government. And I don't know enough about it to comment more on that than that. Strikes across Ukraine as President Xi leaves Russia. Putin now had time on his hands apparently to have more strikes. Now, that's also the day that DeSantis did the U-turn. I'm coming back to that question about DeSantis. Some people in the comments, and like I asked, like if you're reading this in the community, I said, hey, here is DeSantis's information, and if you're an American, just write him and say thank you for supporting Ukraine. Right? That's all. And like, don't belabor it. Just do that. And people were like, "But I don't even want him if he's going to be, this or that, or if he doesn't really believe it." Look, what you want is a presidential election where you can vote for your guy and somebody else can vote for the other guy, and they both support Ukraine. That's what you want. You want the game to be rigged before you go in. You can vote against my Republican candidate if you're on the left. I don't care that you do that. But I want both the Democrat and the Republican candidate to both support Ukraine going into the general election, because that gives us the greatest chance to support Ukraine, right? You don't want a scenario where somebody in the party you don't like doesn't support Ukraine because what if, right? So just like try to play the strategy game here with me and be supportive of that. And it looks like DeSantis may be the most logical alternative. I don't know that will be by the time we get through. It could be somebody else, who knows? But I still think it's worth the time. Okay, so strikes across Ukraine. DeSantis did the U-turn Friday, yesterday. I was reading an article about a child's drawing that led into a police investigation in Russia because it was a child. The parent got hauled off to court because the parent drew the child drew something about peace in Ukraine or something like that, end the war, that kind of thing. Like that's where Russia's mentality is. Doesn't matter that they're hauling off thousands, tens of thousands of children into Russia from Ukraine. That's the kind of thing that they're going to prosecute, which tells you a lot about their country. Wagner may be repurposed to African countries. It looks like that may or may not be true. Prigozhin was arguing that's not going to happen, but it looks like that might be what's going to happen, which would be a fascinating inside military Wagner drama if that actually did happen. I'm going back to the comments, and by the way, I'm about to the end of this. The only other things that I had here were Ukraine is actually creating new types of drones, and they're just so smart in the way that they repurpose things and make them into drones that have, or just the way that they use what they have is actually amazing. But I'll answer your questions, and we only have a little time left. But whatever questions you have, I will do my best to answer. So just start popping them into the chat box. Okay. Iran showed Russia, we already talked about that. Voting for a candidate who lies about his position on policies will create a nightmare. Okay. So CKNJ wrote that. So CKC NJ. So CKC, I'm not asking you to want the Republican by any means. I am asking that you help support Ukraine by ensuring that whichever candidates get to the general election support Ukraine. You can vote against them. You can spend money against them. I don't care. That's not the point. The point is, you want both candidates by the time they get to the general to be supportive of Ukraine. George Ferguson, with Russia's economy down by so much spending, more than it brings in, and its military shot, what do you think Russia will look like after the war? It set itself back economically by a decade. I mean, it's going to be in shambles. There's going to be a lot of rebuilding. I don't want it to be the Weimar Republic after World War I and then come back in a generation and have other issues. I do want it to be brought down to its knees, so it has to open its doors, let the stolen children out, make reparations, all the things that it needs to do, and then be brought back into the community of nations after some cultural and structural changes prevent this kind of crap from ever happening again. Okay, banning specific, where was it? Okay, so CKCNJ says banning specific speech, banning books, arresting others for doing something a territorial leader is against. Are we talking about Russia or okay? So CKC, if you're not going to talk about Ukraine anymore, I'm not going to answer your question on here anymore. Okay, We're talking about Ukraine. I understand that you have angst toward a particular candidate or toward Republicans in general. We're all here trying to support Ukraine. Work with me in trying to support Ukraine. Okay. And no, I'm not going to answer that question either, because you're just kind of being a jerk by not doing that, by not honoring that. When this whole forum, everything in this forum is to support Ukraine. Whether you're Republican or Democrat or in the middle, it doesn't matter. I don't care who you are. You could be a zebra. You support Ukraine, you're in the right place. If you don't support Ukraine, you can argue about that stuff elsewhere. Okay, next one. Ukraine is in danger of not having enough. Is Ukraine in danger of not having enough troops? Yes and no. I mean, the whole population, I mean, will essentially take up arms to the degree that they have to. It's an existential threat. But I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a limited supply. Men can't leave the country unless they have more than 3 children, in which case they get an exemption. So, and people are staying in place. And it's really civilians that slow. If you read about the early invasion, civilians did a great job in slowing down the Russians with the military. Like, the military was doing their thing, but the civilians were putting out roadblocks and letting the military know where things were. So it's a very tall task to occupy an entire country, or even the sliver of the country, with the civilian population totally against you. Okay. It's called a limp gambit. Pretend you're weak. Try to trick your enemy into attacking. Okay, that might be what's going on. Cheesy 1969 said, just because you aren't to blame doesn't mean you aren't ethically implicated. I'm not sure what we're talking about, Cheesy, but I'm happy to try to answer what you were saying. Okay, Robin Klassen. I followed the link that you posted, by the way. Thank DeSantis for his statements of opposing Russian invasion. I think that posting that link and encouraging us to do that was a great idea. I think it is. And look, if the Democrat was, let's reverse it and say the Democrat candidate wasn't Biden and it was somebody else who had an anti-Ukraine position, I'd be doing the same thing with you, trying to help get that person, and then I'd vote against the Democrat because I'm a Republican, right? So that's fine. I just want the Democrat candidate and the Republican candidate going in to have a pro-Ukraine stance. It's that simple. Okay. Fox Sparrow, could Russia's military being decimated cause instability in the stands from Islamists? Yeah, I mean, it could. I was talking to this student from China, and China had just renamed a number, and I didn't talk about this in this list, but China had just renamed officially a number of these places in Russia with old Chinese origin names or something along those lines, kind of like the Muscovy thing. And I think I was joking with him that I think that if China grabbed some former lands in Russia that was once China, I think the West might be like, you know what, we're kind of occupied over here with what's going on in Ukraine right now, so, and might turn a blind eye to that. I don't know for sure, but I think it would be a hard sell to say, China, you better not do that. So, and I think that many of the stands might start thinking, why are we part of this? So anyway, big supporter of Ukraine here. Thank you, John. Cheryl says, I went to my Republican rep's office and asked them to support Ukraine and Social Security. Good to see, probably better to see Republicans doing it. Yeah, absolutely. And if you're a Republican, please go and email DeSantis. And you have no excuse not to, right? I mean, absolutely do. If you're a Democrat, limit it to thank you for supporting Ukraine. Don't try to belabor and try to give your rationale for it. Just say thank you. It'll just sound different coming if you try to argue, and the way that you will argue will sound different and off key. Just like if I was trying to argue something to Pelosi, it would just sound wrong coming from me. So at any rate, yeah, I would just encourage you to do that. Okay, what other questions do you have? We'll give it about 5 minutes if you have questions, and if you don't have questions, we'll be done shortly. John Campbell says, my primary concern is not enough troops for a strong, sustained offensive. Well, I don't know. It's opaque to understand what the troop strength is, or what the actual casualty rate is, because Ukraine doesn't publish their own. And if you read Russia's casualty count, it's absolutely stunning how terrible uh, the accounts are. Because when I say terrible, I mean non-reliable. Like, they'll have ratios that are like 10 to 1. We killed they killed 70 of ours and we killed 700 of theirs. And I'm like, really, 70 to 700? That something sounds a little off. So I mean, but it's seriously, they publish accounts in RT by an order of 10. And if you just move the decimal point, you probably have a better sense of what the actual casualties were. But okay, I already told all my friends not to buy any food from Ukraine after the fall harvest. America buys Ukraine cooking oil too. Why is that? I'm not sure that I understand that. Why not buy any food from Ukraine? Um, that's not something I'm familiar with, but I'm curious now. Okay. I hope the 2 week recap was useful. If the recap is useful, let me know, and maybe I'll do like a weekly recap moving forward, just as a Q&A kind of thing. Because when I'm asking Q&A, I get questions all over the map, and I figured if I framed it in this kind of way, it might be more useful to you. Um, I don't know if it is or isn't. If it is, give me a like or something. Tell me, like, yes, this was a good idea, or tell me, well, it's kind of boring, and I already knew all this stuff. Some of the things that I cover, I try to cover differently than what other commentators, Jake Bro or Dennis Davdov or um, Vlad or Anna from Ukraine or whoever are covering, and I'm looking at things from a different angle. Cheryl said your district is a swing vote in the Tucson area. Would be good to get Republicans on board as an initiative. Yeah, it would. But I think it even easier than that is if we can just talk to through other YouTubers to talk through their audiences about, like, look, if you're an American, just tell your legislator, like, just say thank you for supporting Ukraine, or tell them please support Ukraine, or whatever the candidates are, just tell them to support, because then you'll have a mass of some effect. I mean, the way that these guys work is they're just counting who's for, who's against, and if there's a pretty lopsided for or against, it changes their position. Somebody said in the comments, like, I don't want DeSantis if DeSantis doesn't really believe it. He might not really believe it, but he really wants to be elected. And if he really wants to be elected, he doesn't want to cross the people that are going to vote for somebody else in that process. So he'll start to make public statements to align with the people. And this is what you want from a representative. You want them to actually be doing the will of the people, largely with a little bit of his own understanding. And so, okay, I get you don't want him, but if you're a liberal and you don't want DeSantis, that's different than if you're a Republican and you don't want DeSantis, right? And going even more to the point, if he doesn't really want it, if he puts it into the platform, it makes it hard for him to cross later on. So, if you're worried about, like, regardless of who the candidate is. So I wouldn't worry so much about that as long as it gets enshrined in the platform. It's hard to go back from the platform. Okay, John Campbell, been with you since the beginning. Thank you so much. I too love Jesus and appreciate your perspectives on Ukraine. Awesome. Thanks for being here. I mean, I'm on the conservative. I'm Christian. I'm on that right wing of this, and I support Ukraine. And if you're on the far left wing and you're exactly the opposite of me and you support Ukraine, you're in the right place. Let's all support this together and not be at each other just because of our partisan political differences. This is one of the places where we should be finding some unity, because this is too important not to. All right. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to say thank you and goodbye. And if you have any questions for me, just put them in the comments below. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.